Numbers 8, 9, and 10 are all from Chapter 10. Number 8, remember to read the instructions on these. This is solve using the square root property, meaning we need to isolate the x squared and then take the square root of both sides. So, hang on. So, to isolate the x squared, what can I get rid of first? Minus 1. And this is where when we have an equal sign, that's where we can do the same thing to both sides.
2x squared equals 18.
So I'm left with 2x squared equals 18.
Divide by 2.
Divide both sides by 2 because I want to get that x squared alone.
X squared.
So x squared equals 9. And then when I have an x squared, I square root.
And you get x equals plus or minus 3.
And why is it plus or minus 3?
Because negative times negative 3 equals positive 9. And positive 3 equals positive times positive 3 equals 9.
Very good. So when I take the square root, I'm looking for what number times itself gives you that number. So negative 3 times negative 3 gives you a positive 9, just as positive 3 times positive 3 also gives you 9. So that's my answer. X equals plus or minus 3. Yeah. On to number 9, solve using the quadratic formula. This one is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And we need this formula because we cannot simply isolate x like we could in the last one. There's an x squared and an x, and we can't combine those two, so we can't isolate them. So this formula was a very, it's in your book, but it's a very drawn out and very rather complicated way of solving for x when you have both an x squared and an x. That plus or minus takes care of your two answers when you have a square root. So we need to figure out what a, b, and c are. In this case, a equals 1, b equals negative 4, and c equals negative 5. A is the number that's in front of x squared. If I don't have a number there, it's 1x squared. B is the number in front of x, and c is the number that is by itself. Make sure you pay attention to where your negatives are. So we plug everything into the formula. X equals, there's a negative in the formula, and our b is also negative, so negative, negative 4, plus or minus square root of b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is negative 5. Divide that whole thing by 2 times a, or 2 times 1. And then you go about simplifying everything, getting rid of the multiplication and the squares and stuff like that to make it simpler to deal with. I'm going to pause and give everybody a second to catch up. Okay, back to number 9. So now we need to simplify this. If I have a double negative 4, that gives me a positive 4, plus or minus. What is negative 4 squared?
Positive
16. Negative 4 times negative 4 gives you positive 16. Just an FYI, because this is a really common mistake, this number from here to here, that will always be positive. If you punch it into your calculator and you forget the parentheses, it won't do it right. So you have to be smarter than your calculator and recognize that any number times itself will always be positive. And then here, negative 4 times 1 times negative 5. So negative 4 times 1 is going to be negative 4. Times negative 5 is going to be a positive 20. Remember, you're just multiplying these straight across. And you can just do that on the calculator. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 5. Just make sure you remember that this is a negative 4. And then all divided by 2 times 1, which is just 2. So, x equals 4 plus or minus, then what is 16 times 20, or sorry, plus 20? 36 divided by 2. And what is the square root of 36? 6. So 4 plus or minus 6 divided by 2. Once you are down to just numbers and you don't have any more multiplication or pluses and minuses, so on and so forth, then you're going to split your formula into two separate ones. So 4 plus 6 divided by 2, and 4 minus 6 divided by 2. 4 plus 6 is 10 divided by 2 is what? 5. And then 4 minus 6 is negative 2 divided by 2, which is, running off the side of the paper, negative 1. And those are your two answers for number 9. That would have been section 10.3. Number 8 would have been section 10.1, and then number 10 is going to be section 10.5. The actual equation. What do you notice about it?
Negative. And the answer is 0. There's only two numbers there.
Well,
The chart is huge.
x squared minus 4x minus 5. Look back at number 9.
I thought it was all negative.
X squared minus 4x minus 5. 9 and 10 are the same equation. When that equation equals 0, y is equal to 0, which means what you find with that quadratic formula are your x-intercepts, 5 and negative 1. So when you graph, you can go ahead and graph those 2 points. So x equals negative 1 and x equals positive 5. Then the only other thing we need is we can use the y-intercept. The y-intercept, as we learned in chapter 10, is just the number by itself. Because to find the y-intercept, you put 0 in for your x's, and all you're left with is negative 5. So your y-intercept is negative 5. So the only thing we need to find on number 10 is your vertex. So your vertex formula is x equals negative b over 2a. So negative b is a negative 4 divided by 2 times 1, which equals 4 over 2, which is 2. So label that one. That's your vertex. Once you know what x is, Muhammad, sit up. Once you know what x is, then you can plug that back into the original equation to find y. So, you take y equals 2 squared minus 4 times 2 minus 5. 2 squared equals 4. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And then drop down the minus 5.
Drop down to minus 5. Got it. I don't have it.
4 minus 8 is negative 4. Drop down the minus 5. And I get negative 9 for y. Danelle, did you need anything else? Okay. So that negative 9 is your y. So your vertex is 2, negative 9. So we go over 2 and down 9. What? Oh, that's at 1, 9. That's why that doesn't look right. 2 and then down 9. And then we look at this whole thing. So on every parabola, which is what a quadratic makes, there's a line going down the center that cuts it exactly in half. We already have our x-intercepts on there. We have our vertex on there. So we're going to take this point, that's our y-intercept that we got from that -5, and we're going to mirror it on the other side of that line. So now we have a pretty good guide for the points that we need for our parabola. And that is your review.